Welcome everyone to BoomerWorks. We are delighted to have you here for a rousing session on communicating like a pro if you are a consultant. And I am just thrilled to pieces to introduce my longtime friend and client, Giselle Mcauliffe, who is a communications consultant for the international NGO realm. That's how she worked from when she hails. She's been a former journalist. She has communications in her blood. This is what she does. And she's also launched an executive coaching practice for the communication sector. So she's not only a communicator herself, she helps other communicators communicate, right? So she just gets it coming and going. So we are just so delighted to have her here tonight to lead us in a conversation around how to communicate as a consultant. We wanted to specifically describe that because, of course, there are all kinds of communication styles for all kinds of reasons. But if you are a consultant, this is the session for you to be in. All right. So with that, Giselle, go ahead and share your screen and take it away.
All right. Let's see. Hold on. View. Am I sharing my screen?
You're good.
Okay. Very good. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks everyone so much for coming. And I'm going to talk again, as Shira asked, I'm going to talk about communicating as a consultant, sort of the critical communication points as a consultant. I've been a consultant for 21 years. I worked full-time before then. And as Shira shared, it's all of it has been in communications, broadcast news, then social impact organizations doing their communications, and then consulting and sharing what I've learned with others. So that's what we're doing today. So what type of consultants are we talking about? Because there are a lot of them. A consultant is a person who provides expert advice professionally. And those come in many forms, as you all may know. I'm going to just talk about one form that it comes in, or two forms that it comes in, and that is the way Shira and I function as consultants. So I'm a communications strategist, coach, trainer, and public speaker, and I frequently create short or longer proposals and scopes of work in order to close a contract with a client. And my clients can be very large social impact organizations, national, global even, and they often will send me very long contracts, and I'll talk more about that later, but that's the way I consult. Now, Shira is going to share the difference in her consulting process.
Sure. And I actually have multiple lanes to my highway, right? So I don't just do one kind of consulting. I have B2B where I am working with organizations. I also have B2C where I'm working with individuals. And because of that, I have different ways that I can communicate and I need to communicate with clients. So for example, I am one of my lanes is being an executive recruiter. So every once in a while, and actually not usually, but every once in a while, I will have to respond to an RFP. I say every once in a while because typically my searches are I secure my searches through relationships. So somebody will actually reach out to me and say, hey, I heard about you through networking and so forth. And if that's the case, then I typically don't have to fill out an RFP. I just have a conversation, right? So I don't do the kind of sort of long engagements that Giselle does, or I'll do sort of one-offs. I'll do a keynote presentation or maybe a staff training on something. I also do B2C, which means like business to consumer. So I'm a career coach. I'm a small business coach. And none of those situations do I actually have to write out a formal proposal. That said, I have to verbally communicate. I have to have an intake call, an exploratory call with folks to find out, first of all, what their needs are, and then address how I can best serve them. So mine is much more of a verbal type of a communication pitch, whereas Giselle's oftentimes is more written in a longer contract, a longer proposal.
And then there's a lot of us who kind of do a little bit of all. I sometimes do much more transactional type proposals or just work agreements with clients. So it can be a whole mix. I'm interested now to take a moment and hear from you all about what type of consultant some of you are or are aspiring to be.
You could just put that in the chat. Or you could raise your hand, or you could just open up your mic. Either one. It's fine.
Yeah, I'd love it if they opened up their mic.
Sure.
So I'm a pharma consultant for the pharmaceutical industry.
And what does that entail in terms of, like, what do you do?
So I specifically focus on the medical affairs organization, and my real area of expertise is helping to build a team. So for a new and up and coming company that is approaching launch of a product, I will help them get everything set up from a strategic perspective, and then they'll execute on the plan.
Okay, I get that. Anyone else?
Raka said, or if I'm pronouncing that correctly, process improvement to adapt to VUCA. I'm not sure what that acronym stands for.
Hi, this is sorry, the
Yep.
first name is wrong. It's my son's name, so
Oh,
he's
okay.
been using my Zoom for a little bit of his meetings and virtual classes. So yeah, my name is Minal, and I help in process improvement to adapt to the VUCA environment we live in. VUCA means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Just like we had COVID, and then the market and industries, tech industries mostly are changing so rapidly. And also you must have seen the market during COVID and after COVID is drastically different from what we had and what we have now, and how to adapt to it and how to gain profits and be productive in that. So I help in that kind of process improvement.
Interesting. Are there any aspiring consultants amongst us?
I am an aspiring, well, I'm going through the process of studying and researching, starting my own bookkeeping business, and coming to realize that as a bookkeeper with clients, I will probably need to give them financial tips, advice, suggestions, that sort of thing. So that's why I'm here, to learn how to be a consultant, period. And then I'll probably study up a little bit more on financial consulting. But this is my first step as studying consulting.
Great.
Giselle, Jean said that she said providing employee development workshops is one lane. I'm not sure if that's an aspiring lane, but sounds like it. And Kaya, I think had raised a hand. I'm not sure. I don't see her anymore. But
Hi,
Kaya,
sorry. Yeah, no, there's not much good lighting here, so I don't have my video on.
Okay.
However, it would be to provide assessment of organizational and community culture, and consult to develop programs whereby diversity and equity and inclusion could actually be practicably put into place, connecting the organizations and the community.
Got it. Great.
Maggie's chatted. Maggie said, I'm starting up a life coaching consulting practice. MO says food and beverage, conception, grand opening, and beyond. Linda says, considering starting an organizing business.
Great. And then just before we move on, and you can put this in chat, what do any of you have a specific communicating as a consultant question that keeps you up at night? So sort of a burning reason why you really wanted to see today's presentation, or a burning question about consultant client communications that you're hoping you'll hear answered. I'd just love to see some of that.
Kaya? Kaya, you're on mute.
Right. So no, I guess one of it is if I'm working with an organization, different groups within the organization will probably require different training and different update of their knowledge and skills. So what's the best way to approach that when you're coming to the organization for the original contract? Like, how do you set those subgroups up or explain that?
I'm trying to sort of think about that in terms of how do you communicate that you want to set that up?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. I think we will be addressing that. I want to go back to you maybe later on then in the presentation, but I think that that's really you clarifying your process, your approach. And that should be something that you should be able to discuss with the client or the potential client readily, because that's really a big part of the service that they'll be purchasing from you.
Okay.
Anyone else have a burning
John?
question?
John?
Yes, real quick. So, burning question. So I'm working on I'll say another consulting type business around mergers and acquisitions. And one of the things that I find myself doing is giving stuff away. So if there's any advice you have about that, that would be great.
So what is the question you have about giving stuff away?
Well, just as far as how much, and maybe this comes down to the proposal piece and outline, the framework, I think, I guess is what I'm trying to ask about from a consulting standpoint.
Oh, I see. So you're wondering, how much do you share about your process and approach in your proposal that in a sense you're giving away, because if they don't use you, they have that information. Okay. Yeah, I think I am going to go into proposals, and I can get into that more. I will just tell you right off the top of my head that I think it's very important not to give away your intellectual property, not to give away what they're purchasing from you, your expertise. And that may be being able to present a framework or create one, etc. And there are ways you can do that. And it's more by describing your approach rather than giving them the framework. And then encouraging discussions about how you might approach their work, so they have an understanding of how you utilize and deploy your expertise to create frameworks.
Okay.
So we can talk about that.
And at the same time, some of you may know, and I know Giselle knows this person very well or has read his work, David A. Fields, who is a consultant to independent consultants. He has a concept. Now, and this is not actually to contradict what Giselle said, but there's sort of another way to frame it. And that is, his philosophy is basically there is no such thing as giving away too much intellectual property. Here's where he's coming from. And this is not a blanket statement, okay? Not to contradict Giselle, but only in that when you give away IP, what you're basically saying, you're doing two things. You're showing the client, which is really one main thing. You're showing the client that you have expertise, but it's so much expertise that they're basically showing them they can't do it on their own. They can't execute this. They can have knowledge, they can have ideas, and sure, they can go off and run with it, right? But at the end of the day, you're the one with the secret sauce. You're the one who's actually going to take it to the next level and help them execute it in a way that's meaningful. So I would say take what Giselle said, and maybe even what David A. Field said, and just think about, what are you sharing? Are you sharing something that's, for example, a proprietary model? Maybe not. Are you sharing with them, again, like Giselle said, sort of an approach, a way of thinking, a way of framing things? Sure, maybe that's a great thing to do, because then they see your expertise, you know what you're talking about. But then again, the execution is really what they're buying.
Yeah, and that's I think we're actually saying the same thing, because I'm encouraging you to be able to talk to them about your approach, but not to complete any of the scope of work that they're going to ask you to do.
Right. Don't do the work. You can describe it though.
Yeah. Any other question that's keeping anyone awake at night?
I have a small little question. I had similar question like we had earlier related to the IP. So the most of the information I have, or the knowledge I have, is readily available online. But like you said, how I approach, how I coach the people to be able to get there. But then there are some of the areas where I need to create assessments. I need to send them a form or something, or have the teams work together to give me some input from their own side. Those are some of my frameworks, which are mine. And how do I sell that? I mean, I know they're ready to buy it, but then what should be my price point, and how do I research that?
Okay. That's something we can get into. I'm going to leave that question for us to take up again at the end, and possibly even just you and I at some point. But that really gets into how you value yourself and how you research what your value is as a consultant in comparison to the market of people that do the kinds of things you do. And then communicating it, it gets pretty straightforward once you have figured that your value. And so I think, and also Shira, your Boomer is doing something.
Actually, well, you and I are actually
That's
together.
right. We're doing
That's
it
right.
on Friday.
Yes, we are. I was about to say that on May 5th, we're doing a real joint presentation. Tonight is really Giselle's presentation. I'm just chiming in a little bit, but we're going to do a formal joint presentation on May 5th. We're calling it Own Your Worth and Charge with Confidence. If you go to boomerworks.org and go to the meetup tab and go to upcoming events and scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a list of all of our upcoming events through August, and that's one of them. So we invite you to come back and join us then.
I really urge you to, because as a coach and a consultant, I have formally and informally answered this question for a lot of folk, and it's really critical that you have it nailed down as a consultant, because otherwise you're swimming and you're not necessarily sure where the shore is, and I think that's a real handicap. So good question, and good for us to explore that more in the upcoming presentation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to continue with the presentation now. We'll have chance for other questions, so no worries there. And great to hear about what some of you are doing. It's very interesting. Let's take a moment here to talk about why consultant-client communication is so important, beyond the absolute obvious. But a big part of it is you developing a solid understanding of what your clients need, and you're then having the ability to share your ideas, your recommendations, your expertise clearly. Those two things are what make your services valuable and what really work towards making your consulting a successful business. And I want to now move to a little bit about how you talk about that to your clients. We touched on it a little with some of your questions.
I was just calling in. I didn't know if I needed to talk to Jeff Carson.
Oh, stop.
I'm sorry, should I go on? Okay. So David A. Fields, he has a great book. You can see on consulting if you want to get it.
I'll put it in the chat.
I've read it. Shira's read it. It's very, very helpful. But we're going to start with the communications content as a consultant. And the first thing, if you're not already aware of it, is that when you're talking to clients or communicating with them by email or however, the way you speak with them, the content of what you share with them, it needs to be all about them. It's not about your services. It's about what they need, their business, how it's thriving, how it ways where it could use greater support, and then therefore how you might be able to help them sleep better at night. And that's a really important distinction to make. And I'm going to go into detail on that. So David A. Fields, in his book, the way he illustrates this is there's sort of two ways to look at this. most of the time, normal, healthy people, we view the world logically as from all about us and our family and our friends, and then our connections, as you can see, as goes up in this pyramid. And that's a really normal way to view and take care of yourself and your family and to do well in life. But it's not the way you can communicate to consultants. And I'm going to share let's look at a pitch that somebody might give to a consultant, and they might think it's a perfectly great pitch. So I want you to take a moment.
All right, Giselle, I think you meant to say how a consultant can pitch to a client.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Can pitch to a client. Can everyone read this?
Yeah.
Okay. So take a moment and read it. And so my question to you all is, what's wrong with this pitch? Anybody want to raise their hand?
Or you can just open your mic.
Yep.
It doesn't say what you do. I mean, there's nothing specific about how you do it, just that you've worked with people like them on some topic, but not how you do it really, or what your approach is, or why they would need you.
Well, they do talk a bit about, they have this this proprietary process called best testing. So they are really talking a lot about what they do.
Isn't that the problem?
Right.
As opposed to addressing the client's problems, not about what they do, but what are their solutions, as opposed to just these things they're doing, and understanding what it is the client needs.
Right.
Exactly. So rather than asking about superbiz and coming to understand superbiz and how it might be helped by this consultant and its best testing breakthrough process, this consultant has just gotten the business leader on the phone, let's say, or in a room, and is really just pushing what the consultant and what top-notch consulting does. But it really hasn't made that vital connection that puts superbiz at the top of the conversation, the most important part of the conversation. And it's really about mindset. This consultant, Sue, she's talking about herself, and that's boring to everyone. And that's what's called upside down thinking. And right side up thinking is a pyramid that looks more like this, where the major focus is on the rest of the world or on your clients, and so on and so forth. So the focus moves from you to the client. And so the consultant is talking all about the client, and the client is talking about themselves.
Can I give a quick example of that, Giselle?
Yes.
So yesterday I had this situation where I was being vetted by a potential employer for a search. What I did not do when I opened up the call is say, hey, can I tell you about what I do? My background, didn't do any of that. So what do you need? Tell me about this search. Tell me about what's going on. Now, of course, I didn't ask all the deeper questions I would ask once I got it, but I got enough of a sense to start to have a conversation about what's going on with the organization, why they need this person, that kind of thing. And then slowly but surely, the conversation opened up and turned into something very, very rich, because we went beyond just the search itself. We started getting to culture, because I started asking more questions, and they started sharing with me, well, we've got some tension here because of this and that and the other. And all of a sudden I opened it up into a whole other realm where they could see that I was more than just the typical recruiter. I actually had a holistic view about corporate culture, and I even pulled up a slide and showed them about cultures and all these different things. And it showed them that I could really address their very specific challenges more so than just, hey, I've got 25 years of experience doing X, Y, and Z. We really were able to pinpoint their specific challenges, and I could speak right into it. So asking questions about what's going on with the client, to Giselle's point about what are their pain points and making it about them, can help showcase your value in a way that you never would have been able to if you had just launched right into what your pitch is.
That's a great example. One I can give from my side as a communications consultant is most of the time, my clients, they know enough about communications to know that they need some help with their communications, but they have a very shallow understanding of it because it's not their area of expertise. And so when they contact me, they often have very vague objectives that they're hoping I can help them with. And so my conversation is always a discussion, an interview in which I'm asking them about how they communicate and how they think they could communicate better. And I probe them, about how their strategies and their tactics and their resources and what's worked in the past and what hasn't. By the time I'm finished, I really understand them and how communications may or may not be able to help them. And so what I do is I walk them through sort of my mini process of understanding who they are and what their communications needs are, and then how I, with my communications expertise and my approach to serving clients, can help them. And that is the conversation that wins me business. It's not about just, a bullet point of what I'm capable of doing. Does anyone here have an example of a right side up pitch that they utilize or they have? Well, hopefully, maybe you will after this presentation. I'm going to keep moving along. So that's really it about content. I want to look now more into sort of direct interactions, in-person discussions, and the wider communications that occurs with that. So there's a whole lot of communications that's really just tone and style. And so when we start to look at this second aspect of communications, it's good to go through what I use as a checklist for really important they're not the direct words. You don't get in front of a client and say, hi, I'm a confident person, and I'd love to have a more friendly relationship with you. You do it by how you communicate. And so, a first thing to sort of think about might be, are there any situations with current or potential clients when you feel a little insecure and not entirely confident? Can anybody provide an example of that? I used to have, feelings of lack of confidence, and I really began to overcome that by establishing more of a more of a friendly relationship with my clients, talking to them much less formally and more person to person, more the way I would speak with acquaintances that I really enjoy and think I'm going to enjoy and want to get to know them better. Because ultimately, if you're one person talking to another and you're not allowing yourself to assume I'm a consultant speaking now to a client, and whatever that means for you, then you're dealing with a human being, and it helps break down those invisible barriers that can emerge. When you're talking to a client, and we just discussed this with the examples of how you have a right side up discussion with a client, are you going out of your way to figure out who they are, what they like, what they don't like, what the pain points are. What tendencies do they have? Whenever I take on a new client or I explore working for a new client, I am indirectly interviewing them as much, if not more, than they're interviewing me. And that's because the wrong client can be a loss leader for you. A very difficult client, for instance, a client that is very indecisive. There's a whole lot of things you can start to pick up when you have these kinds of conversations with your clients. And you will pretty quickly get a sense of whether or not they're a good fit for you. And I learned early on that if my gut was telling me, I'm not sure about this, to really listen to it, because that could be the kind of contract that turned into a nightmare, because the chemistry wasn't there, and usually the client trust in me wasn't there for whatever reason. So I think these are a really important checklist to ask yourself. Another big part of communicating effectively is being aware of your body language. And some of you may already be aware of this, but all the research in the world shows that, in fact, we communicate the majority of our communication and how we're received by others and by our clients happens through our body language and through our tone and through our style. But body language is so much more important even than what we say. Effective communication is all about body language. So think about communicating your confidence through your body language as much as through your expertise, your understanding of the issues that the client wants you to assist them with. And how do you do that? Obviously, these are two great photos of potential consultants, I think. They are looking straight into the camera. They're making direct eye contact. They're engaged with you if you were sitting opposite them. They're being an attentive listener. And if they're smart, they're using a firm but friendly tone. These are all ways to exude confidence. If deep down inside you feel insecure in your interaction with a client, I have to share with you that it'll probably come through. It's really very rare that anybody can act confident if they don't feel it. And so I just want to stress that if you feel like you are regularly uncomfortable in your communications, regularly some sense of insecurity or fear or whatever that is, being on the spot, that I think it's really important to examine that. However you do those sorts of things. I have some clients that meditate, others that have gone to therapists. I learned early on in my career that I had a irrational fear of middle-aged men when I was in my 20s that I worked for. And I really had to sit myself down and sort of figure out, why do I feel so beholden to them? And I realized, well, my father was a very serious disciplinarian, and he definitely had sort of left me with this sense of insecurity if I didn't get his approval and if he expressed disappointment. I always wanted, obviously, to please him. And once I realized that was going on, I could completely let go of it. But I really had to sit down and make myself figure that out. So this is something I always like to point out. And now looking at your client, what do you see? Direct eye contact, relaxed eyebrows, crossed arms, authoritative posture, his neutral expression. You see that all in this photo of, let's say, a client looking at you. And so it's really important to be aware of what that means they're communicating to you, but also if you're doing likewise, what you're communicating to them. So in addition to engagement, direct eye contact demonstrates confidence, usually intelligence, and interest. It could be negative or positive. It depends on how the conversation goes, and this guy isn't talking to us, so we don't know. Relaxed eyebrows. His eyebrows are relaxed here. That usually indicates the person is comfortable while listening to you. Raised eyebrows often signal discomfort. Crossed arms usually indicate some resistance and lowered receptivity to what the person is hearing or to perhaps what you're saying to them. Crossed legs, crossed arms, both. The person is putting up a barrier between you and them for some reason. It's good to be aware of that. It's also an authoritative posture, depending on the rest of the body, and it does demonstrate leadership. And sometimes when I'm working with a group of people at an organization, I really take note as to the real leaders in the room. Sometimes they aren't the designated leader. It's good to be aware of that. And facial expression. This gentleman has a pretty neutral facial expression, but it could change. That if it stays neutral, that means he's open to what is being shared. He's listening. He hasn't made a decision. If those eyebrows go up and if he frowns, we kind of know how he's receiving the information. But at the moment, he's being open to it. So I want to take a look here. This is, a consultant and client together in this photo. And, what do you see? What I see is the consultant making really strong eye contact and actively listening to the client, who seems to be quite animated. He's using his hands. I also notice that their postures are very similar, and their hands, it's very similar. So, it demonstrates, the active listening and eye contact demonstrates in this photo that the client is interested in what they're talking about. He's being animated in what he's giving, and the consultant is very interested. And the mirrored posture is a really important conversation, a conversation note, because people are usually expressing a like-mindedness or a mutual receptiveness to what is being discussed by either person when they start to mirror each other physically. And likewise, if they go the complete opposite, if one person is sitting down and very calm and leaning back, and the other person is leaning forward and has an expression even the least bit of raised eyebrows and confusion, that tells you that there's a disconnect between the two people. So that's what I see here. So I want to really continue now in terms of, the next step in communicating is, how do you actually discover what your clients really need and value? Now, I know that may sound very simple to a lot of you. Well, I know they need this and I provide it. But what I'm asking you to think about here is beyond that, because people have a lot of needs in terms of their leadership and how your work with them might help support that or negate it. There's a lot of politics if you're working with an organization and more than one person. So I want to go through a process for really discovering this. The way you do it is by asking the right questions. And here are some of the questions that I ask. Once clients begin to describe a project, you want to ask probing questions to get them to really clarify. Like I said, in my experience as a communicator, potential clients often share very shallow ideas about what they want communications to do for them. And communications may or may not be able to do that for them. And communications may be able to do something fabulous for them and they haven't thought about it. So I always delve in with the clients to get them to articulate to me in depth about what their objectives are and what will tangibly be different. And I use questions like this one. Another question I might ask is, how do you define success for this project? I'm really asking them, so let's say you engage me and I achieve everything you've talked about, these objectives and how we've discussed them in more depth. How would you define success? What will have happened? What will be the new world as a result of me completing this work, collaborating with you, advising you, etc.? And again, pressing for tangible answers. I work for social impact, and one of the weaknesses that leadership in social impact organizations often have, I've noticed, is that they will talk in process terms. They will talk in somewhat vague terms about the outcomes and the outputs they want. And I am always pressing them to be specific with me so that I know when I have produced a certain deliverable or when I have advised and provided strategies that they adopt, that the client and I can be really clear that this is about achieving this definition of success for them. Are there any other good questions that you all ask as consultants to find out what your clients need and what they value that you'd like to share right now? And does anyone have any questions about this point in terms of delving for the client's real needs and values? Okay. I want to shift now from written conversation to, from spoken conversation to written conversation, and talk about communication tips in terms of written communication. And the first question, of course, always to ask is, what are the essential characteristics of good business writing? And I'm not talking about grammar, although good grammar is helpful. The first tip, and I've got several here, is to be very clear about why you're producing this written material, whether it's an email, whether it's a text, whether it's a letter, whether it's a proposal, any kind of message. What is the purpose? Why are you doing this? And why is this the way to communicate with your client? When you go ahead and produce this written content, have you done it in a way that is understandable and concise? There is a time and place for creative figures of speech and poetic turns of phrase, but rarely is a business letter the time or place to do that. So the priority in writing is to communicate specific information and to avoid wasting words, and also to be precise with the words that you do choose. You also want to make sure that you're writing for your target audience. Who you are writing to makes such a difference. And again, this goes into being really clear that they don't feel like you're writing to them as if they're an idiot, because they may be a technical expert that wants to engage with you at their level, or it may be that that in fact you have some pretty comprehensive and technical concepts you want to explain to them. And so when you write to them in whatever form you want to make sure that you're being clear and understandable. And, you know, a tricky aspect of writing is just like the aspect of tone in speaking with clients. Your client's perceptions about your attitude toward the subject matter or you know, to a group that you're communicating with, that can easily be misinterpreted in writing. So it's very important to be aware that an email or a letter, even a memo, it can sound colder and much more severe than you may intend. I go out of my way to be overly polite or much more polite and careful with my written tone in emails than when I'm speaking. And it's just because of that, because I've received emails from individuals where I've thought, oh, okay, you know, put me in my place. And you know what? I discovered very often afterwards that wasn't at all their intention, but they didn't really look at the tone of what they were writing to me in the email. So be very, very aware of that. And of course, you don't want to be overly informal, but you also don't want to be overly familiar. So
And Giselle, if I can also add a generational lens to this as well.
yes.
As we all know, we have multiple generations in the workforce, and there are some younger generations that are actually expecting, shall we say, a happier, friendlier tone even than maybe some older generations, where exclamation points are very accepted and even expected. And so one thing that you want to do is, if you've already connected with this individual, if it's not your first time reaching out and they've already written to you, mirror their tone. If they're an exclamation point person, great. If they're not, back away from them. See how effusive they are. See how professional they are. It's good to sort of mirror their tone a little bit so that you're related to them, much as you would if you were in person. You might modulate your tone or your body language to them, but do be aware that some of the younger generations are much more sort of friendly in their approach, in their writing approach.
I think that's a really good point. That's a really good point, especially if you're working with a group that are multiple generations. There's a lot of juggling that you may have to do in your communicating. And finally, and that's why I've got the communication pro tip stamp on this slide. The last one is paying attention to form and protocol. Again, I'm not trying to talk about, you know, going back a century and worrying about the exact structure and form, but, you know, business letters, emails, proposals, memos, many types of business writing have a particular format that is familiar to everyone. And so you want to utilize that. You don't want to do a proposal and present it like a familiar exchange via email. It won't resonate. It won't work. And it will confuse people, because the minute they pick up a document or look at something electronically, they're immediately interpreting what it is and what it isn't. So adhering to a standard form eliminates confusion and helps the reader quickly identify the purpose of the document. So you don't want to be wildly innovative in your communication when you're thinking about, you know, form and sort of accepted protocol. I want to give some examples, clear and to the point. So here's an email. This is an actual email I sent recently to a client who I gave a training proposal to. Now, the client and I had a long conversations. Funnily enough, potential clients often will spend 30 minutes to an hour with me, because I'm talking all about them, and they're usually very interested to hear that and to keep that going. So here I am, I have the training proposal done for them, and I'm sending them an email, and I'm not going to waste their time. Here's the training proposal. Let me know if you want to recommend any changes. I'm enthusiastic about working with you. Thank you. And I always say in my emails, if I've attached something, because I don't want them to guess, and I don't want them to miss it. Maybe they don't see the attachment somehow in the way their email is received. So this is an email that is only as long as it needs to be, and it's crystal clear in what my objective of it is sending this email is. And I'm also being clear about how I may want them to review it and maybe contact me and ask for changes. So that's really important to do.
And if I could just highlight something, Giselle, because I
Mhm.
think some people on this call might be thinking, well, this is very 101. This is very basic. Giselle, why are you sharing with us a very basic email? I just want to underscore something. People do not have a lot of time to read these days. They're flying through their emails. And to the extent that you can be short and concise and crisp, just like Giselle is sharing right here, will show that you're respecting the client's time, that you are getting to the point. This is not a 101 concept. This is actually something that I think is very, very important. You know, there's an old expression, I think some people quote it to Mark Twain. I'm sorry to write you I'm sorry to write you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. So Giselle is saying she's getting to the essence of things, saying it very short, very quickly, and saying what needs to be said in this email and saving the longer conversation for the in-person conversation, right? I think too many times a lot of people waste a lot of time in these emails to clients explaining things and going over, and they don't have time to read. Giselle's being very respectful in how she's writing this.
Yeah, I get a lot of emails from other people, uh, even from consultants that I sometimes want to subcontract to me to help me with some specific piece of work I'm doing for a client. And I can't tell you how often they send me information and it's not entirely clear. And even the information, the attachment, the proposal, or whatever it is, I often am going through and saying, okay, but so do you mean you'll do this? And by what date? And on and on. So this really does feel like 101. I can't tell you how many questions I have all the time with emails that I receive from folks. And then there's also the issue of tone and friendliness and and all of that. So everything we talked about before. It's okay for a client to not say hi, Giselle, and maybe just type me one sentence and attach something. They're the client. I'm the consultant. I'm there to communicate with them in whatever way is easiest and best for them, as long as we both understand each other clearly. But I'm not going to do that to my consultant. I'm just going to add a little bit more respect and sweetness to my emails, and that's just a rule that I live by. So I want to then, this is the email. I've referenced a proposal, and I want to talk about proposals. I don't want to be a 101 again, but it's really helpful to have a template that you go to and that obviously you're changing and revising or tweaking in whatever way you need to. But this is literally my outline for my proposals. And it really helps me get them out quickly, first of all. And secondly, there's just no fluff in here. And I'm going to show you this exact template, this outline in a proposal that I have created. So let me hold on here one second and pull that up for you. Okay. Assure me everybody can see this, Sharon.
Good.
Okay, so you saw that structure. So, no, I don't even put a fancy cover on it anymore. I used to. But, clients don't care. And also, sometimes it's like, what's the big deal with this proposal? Just tell me what you can do and let me get a sense of whether or not you're fit for us. I do understandings because in my line of work, it's really important for me to share that I know what the client needs and I know the circumstances around that, what their challenges are. And I got all of this from my conversation with this client who's seeking a customized strategic communications planning training. So you see that I'm just mirroring this back to them. And this is telling the customer, I know who you are and I know what you need, and I heard what you told me when we talked. And so I am putting that down there. And also, I'm doing it for me. I want to make it really clear that I'm going to meet your needs. And this is what we talked about. And so they may come back to me and say, I don't really feel that your training goal of discerning when external vendors rather than our internal resources should be utilized is a vital part of this training, and I might delete it. But we certainly talked about it, and they did emphasize it during the conversation. I also talked to them about how I would help them. I do various types of training. So here I'm clarifying, I'm going to do this type of training. It's going to be interactive, it's going to be customized, and it's going to be a mix of my coaching expertise and experiential learning in the workplace. What does that mean? I've even given a footnote. Part of what I'm trying to display here is I really know what I'm doing when it comes to training. And she and I talked about how rather than me just training her in how to write a top-notch strategic communications plan for her nonprofit program, and then she was going to go away and write the plan. And I said, why don't we make writing the plan part of the training? And by doing that, obviously, I'm adding a lot more value to her getting the training, because she will not only learn how to write top-notch strategic communications plans, she will have hers done for the next year by learning how to do it. And so I'm explaining that here, and that's explaining the process. In the objectives, now I'm getting into a scope of work. And so I am presenting this like a scope of work. Here's what we're going to do. And I'm very tangible here, as we talked about earlier. I'm clear about the time frame. Approach in this instance means who's going to do the work. And I also want to, again, sort of clarify where it's coming from, because on my website, I have a lot of information about communications coaching and master classes in communications strategic planning. Now I'm breaking it into the proposed scope of work. In my case, I'm looking to give the client something that they can literally cut and paste into whatever form of a contract they want to give me. And my clients usually want to give me big ones. So here, and I will tell you this, they did cut and paste this exactly as I have it from proposed scope of work down. And in my case, I'm being very clear, because the kind of work I give is very advisory in its substance. I've discovered that clients feel more confident about utilizing me if they're getting deliverables, if they're getting something tangible that reflects the recommendations and the insights that I'm giving them. And so that's why I have this broken down into steps and into deliverables. And really all I'm doing is creating in deliverable 1, I'm taking notes that I would have formed and utilized and shared with them verbally and in the training, and I'm just cleaning it up and giving it as a memo so they know, they understand what I understand, and they have a good sense of the research I performed. And then, the design of the training plan. Again, I just want them to see that all of this, it comes from somebody who really knows what they're doing and has a clear process, a clear plan. And then finally, because if you can't measure what I do as a consultant, then why hire me? And so I always find a way to put in measurement. In this case, I will have conducted a assessment of the person I'm training before we start the training. And I will be going back to that same assessment to evaluate what they hopefully have learned from the training at the end. So then I get into compensation. I'm really clear about that, no long-windedness, and the schedule, and I make it clear, the work I just described, the time frame that'll be done, reviews and approvals. This is something I'm going to talk to you more about in contracts. In my work, And in any work where you're producing a written product, I'm very often doing that. If clients have to review and ultimately approve it before you can move on, you better make sure that you put in writing how many reviews and approvals you are giving the client, and also who in the client organization is the person managing this work. I learned this the first time many years ago when I signed up with a client, and all of a sudden the client contact kind of receded into the background, and a room full of chefs became my reviewers and approvers, and boy, was that a nightmare, and boy, did it drag out the project, and boy, did I spend a lot more time than I had actually, budgeted for. And then qualifications, obviously, I'm just sharing with them how I'm qualified to do this and a little bit about me and my bio. So that this proposal, this is the template I use, very straightforward, to the point. It's 4 pages, and that's even with the fluff about me at the end. So it's really, it's really only 3 pages, 2.5, you could say. So, again, concise, to the point. What information do they need? What information do they not need? So I'm going to go back now to our presentation here. And let's see, I have to sharing the screen. Let's see. Thank you guys for holding. Okay, here we are. We're back again. So again, you just saw that. There's the proposal. Now, let's say you have won the project and you just received, like I did in this case, and in many cases, a 14-page contract. That's how I always feel, just like this woman looks when I get them. So, when I first got these big contracts, and organizations have these big contracts because they've got legal and they've got their own way of contracting consultants, and that's all fair and good. The first few times I got these big contracts 20 years ago, I went off to a lawyer and asked them to look at it. And it was really a pointless thing because the lawyer was trying to look after me, but they were doing it, they were doing it to such an excessive degree that it really wasn't going to help me get the contract. And it really was, they were going over things that weren't ultimately really that important. And I had to sit down and ask myself, okay, so what do I need to really examine in these contracts? Yeah, they're 14 pages. I'm smart. I can read them. I know if there's something crazy in here, and I can point it out to the client and ask them why that's vital. And and I had a 36-page contract from a foundation once, and they had things in there that had nothing to do with me because they just gave me this contract that they give to any kind of consultant. And so I got them to take it out because it was about lobbying and things I wasn't going to do. And that was helpful. But really, I only focus on a few things. And I focus on these things. The contract term. So when does the contract begin and end? And on the contract I got for my training, it took them three or four tries before they got that right. So you want to have a sense of that and that it's correct. Mostly my reviews of contracts are just showing obvious mistakes they've made. The next one is compensation and expenses. I want to make sure that what I put in my proposal and my scope of work for how I would be compensated, whether or not I would receive compensation for certain types of expenses. I want to make sure that is really clear in this contract that they have produced for me. And I want to know, how do I have to give them an invoice? I'll write down within 2 weeks upon your receipt of an invoice from Bigger Impact. That's my consultancy. You get into that kind of detail. I never leave it vague as to how long they have to compensate me, the time frame. from when they receive an invoice. And obviously I'm making sure that the budget and how I broke it down, we've all agreed to the same thing. Contract, client supervisor. I talked about that when I showed you my proposal. This is really important for some consultants. It's very important for me. I need to have it absolutely clear that the person I've been in contact with all this time, in this case, the individual is a woman that I'm training, that she is the person who is working with me, collaborating with me, obviously, in getting trained, and that how we're doing it and whether or not the training plan that I'm going to create is approved, that this is the person who's doing it. And I'm not suddenly surprised that somebody who doesn't know anything about our training, her supervisor, or a supervisor of some sort, is going to step in, and boy, here I am trying to explain myself to someone else, and also they're rarely available to review and approve anything. That's what I'm making sure isn't going to happen. Another thing I always look at in these big contracts is termination. Very often I get contracts, it's where the client can terminate me just the way it's written here for any reason, but they don't actually write it so that I can do the same. And I very often go back and say, listen, fine, but I want let's rewrite this so we have the same rights of termination on both sides. And I've never had a problem making them do that. But it does interest me that they're ready to have me sign something that, takes that control away from me, but gives it all to them. And then number of revisions. I spoke about this, but so again, I just get clear if I'm delivering pieces of work, deliverables, written content, how many times they get to revise it under this budget I've given them. And if they want to revise it 6 times instead of just twice, they are going to pay an extra amount to do so. I do it for 2 reasons. Obviously, because I want to be paid for all the extra time I'll be spending. But the other reason I do it is because it helps my clients stay on task. Before I did this, I had a client who, a 1-year project turned into a 2-year project, and that was just because there was no incentive for them to finish all their revisions and to move on. So that's another piece. Deadlines, obviously, I have deadlines, and in my case, in the contract, instead of the time frame week 1, 2, 3, and 4, 3 through 6, there would be actual dates in there. Okay, so that's a lot I've shared with you, and I want to open the floor up to all of you for any questions you have, certainly about contracts, but any of what I have shared with you. I'd be delighted to hear your questions.
Hi, Giselle. Thank you.
Hi.
I'm wondering, what was your process or your ongoing process to determine your fees?
I surveyed a number of other strategic communications consultants that worked primarily for nonprofits or social impact organizations. That could be the World Bank, or could be a corporate social responsibility division of a firm. And I asked them just very point blank, I did, a long survey. What do you do? How do you do it? And how much do you charge? And everybody was very open with me about it. And I listened to that. And then I sat down with myself and decided what my value per hour was, and also per day. And that is the way. And then when it comes to flat fees, and because sometimes it is better for me to present a flat fee, I do that. I sit down and I go through my whole work process, and I put hours or days next to it, and the amount I charge per hour or per day, and I make that my flat fee. A little extra to have some wiggle room, and that's how I do it.
Okay, thank you.
There is one final step I left out, and that final step is something my husband, he has owned his own business longer than I have. I absolutely insist in myself that whatever that rate is, I own that rate without any hesitancy whatsoever. So, and what do I mean by that? If you felt you could look at yourself in the mirror or talk to anyone and without question say, my rate is $50 an hour, and I think that's pretty low for a lot of the people in this room, certainly would be low for me. I would then you want to have that kind of assuredness. If you can say that with confidence and say to someone, no, I'm really, negotiation is, really, this is my value. And however you say it, I have lots of good diplomatic ways to say that. The experience and the processes and the insights that we've talked about together for half an hour on the phone before I gave them this proposal and my cost. So, you have to own it. If you feel hesitant, if you feel at all insecure about the price you're stating, you probably aren't going to get it, because body language will give it away. And I know this because I do hire subcontractors, other consultants that have expertise in areas that I don't, to do bits of work. And I always know when they're not really giving me their bottom line price. And I'll talk to them about it. So you've got to own it. You've really got to own it. And there's a lot more to that, and we'll talk about it during the presentation we give in the coming weeks.
Okay,
Yeah.
well said. Thank you. I do appreciate that.
For sure. And some of the things we'll be talking about are the different types of ways that you can charge. So Giselle mentioned, of course, the hourly. She mentioned the flat fee. There is also, yes, the day rate and the monthly retainer for some consultants. That's also very appropriate. And there are ways to think about, how you charge, where you charge, sort of where you are in the market, kind of in terms of your competition, geographically even can play into that. Yes, the confidence is very important, and people value what they invest in. So the more confident you are, the more they're going to value your work. I've had it happen over the years where I've had to raise my rates. And in fact, funny enough, I was just reaching out to a woman who is actually also a David A. Fields type of a aficionado. In that vein, David A. Fields was actually trained by somebody named Alan Weiss. And Alan Weiss it believes in something called value-based fees, which is something you could research. But I mentioned her because she was actually a mentor of mine, just a colleague many years ago. She was one of those people in my life who helped me do exactly what Giselle's talking about, and be confident and raise my rates. And I remember sitting with her over lunch one day in DC, and we were talking about my keynote presentation rates, which I won't say what they are publicly here, but I'll say they were X. Okay. And she said, well, Shira, why aren't you charging Y? And I had this story. I said to her, because Roberta, I said, I don't have a book. Now, where did I come up with that? I have no idea, but it was a story I was telling myself. And she basically jumped across the table and shook me by the shoulder. She's like, what are you talking about? Charge Y. And so and it was more. And I had to swallow really hard. And as it happened that afternoon, I had an intake call with a prospective client, and the client said, what do you charge? And instead of saying X, I swallowed hard, but I said it with some confidence. I said Y. Now, they couldn't do Y, but they could do X plus a little. They said, well, our budget is only X plus. I'm like, so I got the extra little that I would not have gotten. I just said X. And I never forgot that. And I have imparted that to a lot of people. And I'm sure Giselle has imparted similar wisdom. But definitely,
and this is something we will talk more about. And this also comes into confidence in all your communication. And I think confidence also comes from authenticity. If I don't know something, I admit, I don't know. I'd like to take some time and actually delve into that and get back to you. Or whatever it is. But I think it's really important it should all be grounded in the same confidence you have about doing the work, doing the consulting that you do. And I'll share, it saddens me, but I have done a lot of work on this almost exclusively with women because it's very rare,
Yes,
you guys,
yes,
you know, and
can.
it has to do with
Me
how
too.
we're raised. And women to this day
Yeah.
don't want to offend somebody by, you know, telling them, or by even allowing themselves to believe that they are worth X amount. And, you know, then they're not worth it, because if they can't own it, they can't be it.
Very
So,
important that we empower women to do this. Good point, Giselle.
anything else about all these communication concepts I shared? Did anything strike you?
Stephanie, do you have your hand up?
Oh no, coincidentally, when you just told your story about the X and the Y rates as far as confidence, that really was my question, as far as how to have, increase the confidence. I know earlier Giselle said that she used familiarity when she was speaking with them to increase her confidence. I was just going to ask, is there anything else to help bolster that confidence when asking, for the appropriate rate for yourself instead of being humble and
So two things,
basically.
Stephanie. Number one, you're worth it. What you offer is worth it. I just need you to own that. Number two, as I mentioned before, people value what they invest in. So if you are, so think of three different kinds of cars, okay? A Kia, a Honda, and a Porsche, okay? Now, I'm not saying that we can all afford the Porsche. In fact, most of us can't. But when we see that really high price tag, we're like, whoa, that's valuable. If you said that a car only costs $2,000, which Kias don't, I understand, but if a car only costs $2,000, you say, what's wrong with it? Okay. So truly there's a perception here. So if you are undercharging, your value is actually decreased. Not to say that what you're offering is decreased. I'm taking the perceived value of what you're offering. Now, I'm not also suggesting that you go way out of market. Okay, because maybe you shouldn't be charging Porsche rates. Tony Robbins, he can charge Porsche rates because he's Tony Robbins. Okay, none of us on this call are Tony Robbins, and yet maybe we should be charging Honda rates instead of Kia rates, if that makes any sense. So just look at what the market can bear, test it out a little bit. And by the way, different sectors can have a different nonprofits at different rates than for-profits, different rates than the government. Geography matters. Are you in a major metropolitan city or a small city? All of those things matter. But when you can test the market and see where kind of the range is, I encourage you to go a little higher than what you're comfortable with, because again, your perceived value is going to be higher in the eyes of the client.
Yeah, I will also say this is something I've really worked with people on, and some people, they can really succeed with what Shara has shared, and a number of people I've worked with can't. And in those cases, I really urge you to sit down and ask yourself, in whatever way you find helpful, why do I want to be able to charge X, but I feel like I don't have the courage to ask for it? And it's really important to find out what it is. Like, what's the worst that could happen? They might say no, but nothing worse than that's going to happen.
Or they might try to negotiate you down, which is okay.
Yeah, they may.
If you're already starting high, you can go a little bit lower.
Yeah, but the hesitancy, if you really feel like, if anyone feels any kind of intense emotion, there's probably something else going on, something more, and it's all yours, but look at it. Don't deny it, And again, if you've done your research and you know what others are charging, in your region, in the kinds of things you do, believe your research. Don't think you have to. I have so many times people come to me and start to tell me why they think, even though the research shows they're at X, why they really should be, lower than that. And I'm just like sitting there saying, why? Like, don't convince, why do you have to convince yourself that, like, what's going on? And you'd be surprised. A lot of us have a disconnect in really valuing ourselves. So consulting can be tough if that's the case.
Good to build your confidence.
Any other questions? Could I ask what any of you found to be particularly helpful in today's presentation?
Any aha moments?
I can answer that. Communicating, you had a lot of communication tips, not just verbiage, but body language and the way you want to look at someone, the way you want to smile at your clients or future clients, especially through the contract phase. That was very informative, very educational for me. Because you don't really, sometimes I just don't know how to talk to people, especially I'm thinking, okay, well, how am I going to talk to someone if I want their business? So, I'm still, I have a lot to learn in that regard, but this is an awesome step. And I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I really recommend David A. Field's book. Because one of the tips he has is that if you're talking to a potential client about them and about their business and their challenges and their successes, the sense of feeling like you don't know what to talk about or how to approach them will quickly disappear. He points that out early on in his book, because it's not about you, it's about them. And everybody likes to talk about themselves.
Right.
It's like, when I was young and I remember being advised about job interviews and being told, I know this doesn't sound quite right to you, but if the interviewer does most of the talking, that's a good sign. The less talking you do, the better. Because then they're just hearing themselves talk about what they need, and hopefully you're just providing inputs that reinforce your agreement and your ability to meet those expectations. So, it's about them. It's not about you. And if you don't have a lot of questions to ask a potential client, then you got to take a step back and figure out what's going on.
Thank you very much.
Marguerite said, I appreciated the overview of the statement of work. That is communication. Thank you.
Giselle, I would echo Marguerite's comment about the statement of work. And what I'm trying to work out in my own mind is this bridge between a time when you speak to people about how you work so that you don't give away free advice, and the point at which you give them a proposal. I assume at that point you have what you believe is a hard commitment to secure your services when you hand over the proposal, but I want to hear you describe that before.
No, I don't. I have deep interest, and very often they're not asking for a proposal from anyone else. So I have strong confidence because everything I put in the proposal, I've talked to them about in one way or another. And so the proposal just formalizes it and gives them a chance to rubber stamp it and say, okay. But I don't always have the work, and sometimes I don't get it for various reasons. I've become much more discerning in figuring out, when I should do a proposal and when I shouldn't, when people are just kind of fishing and they're going to put me to work making proposals, but I'm such an outlier, the chances of me getting the work is just so minuscule, blah, blah, blah. That just has to do with, what I do for consulting and my experience. I'd like to know, Robert, tell me about your experience in terms of this interaction that you're asking about. Can you walk me through your conversations and sort of where your uncertainty unfolds?
Sure. A couple of instances, I'm thinking of two projects. In one instance, a client of a former employer came up with this completely different set of work that he wanted to start a company with some people, and it was not something my former employer would have been inclined to manage, but I was inclined to be able to manage it because of sort of unique experiences. Namely, I had lived in Asia for 11 and a half years and had contacts there. And they had a pretty interesting plan, a lot of details, a lot of people worked out, they had a history. And yet, bottom line, at the bridge of this thing, I wound up burning a great deal of time because they had some internal things that weren't resolved. And it's kind of an old story, but I'm still somewhat frustrated about it when I consider the time I burned. And I think that was a large part of it, because there were certain things they couldn't quite bridge. They couldn't make certain crossings to certain areas in Asia. They couldn't make certain, because of just who they were. There were a couple of cultural assumptions that were all off, but really they needed like people and contacts. So, describing what to do and how to do it, and confirming some things on the other end cost me a great deal of time. I had to confirm things in Asia. Can we talk to these people, these people, these people? What I didn't do is make introductions, but still the time I lost was painful.
Yeah, that sounds to me like there was this blur that happened for you between doing work and that you should be paid for, and pulling together a proposal that was going to work for the organization and for this hoped endeavor for the longer term. And so I think it's really important to, whenever you're having a conversation about something that could involve your consulting services, to, in your mind, to be really clear, you're always willing to talk and hear about a proposal. But the bottom line is, are you talking to me about something that you have the money to do and are going to do, and that you're seeking somebody with my expertise to help make this endeavor that you are funded to do and you are going to do, but you need, and to do so, to complete it satisfactorily, need your expertise. If those things aren't in place, you don't want to stand around talking too much more. Now, building a whole business from scratch, and then maybe formulating a business in partnership with someone, that's something else. And that, but even there, I did that with somebody once. And, I made the mistake of just spending too much time about what we might do. I think it's just really important to be clear. This is, for this project, this is what I can bring to it. So if they need me to make contacts in Asia, or to prove that there are contacts in Asia, they need to pay me for that. Like, I would love to see if we can establish these contracts, and here's how I do it. And here's the time and the cost involved. Would you like to purchase my time to do that for you or not? No? Okay. Well, if you have the money, come back and knock on my door. It's clear to me what needs to happen, but obviously I can't spend time on it if you can't compensate me. So just never, those conversations about the work have to be grounded upon a person or organization that is funded to do something that you feel confident doing and doing well. And you can say, okay, here's how I would approach it, and here's what it would cost you for me to pursue it, to do it.
No, well said. Well said. So, thank you.
Okay, so we are actually at time, unless anyone else has one more question, we can slip in here. All right, so we'll wrap up. So round of applause for Giselle. Thank you so much for this rich presentation. I think everybody really benefited from it. Just so on a couple housekeeping notes. First of all, This presentation will be recorded. I put it in the chat. Go to boomerworks.org, go to the training center tab, and then go down to marketing your business. So that's all in the chat there for you. And that should be up in the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll also upload Giselle's PowerPoint, which will be at the very bottom of that page under the downloads. We do look forward to seeing you in future presentations. If you want to connect with us, again, in fact, I'm going to share my screen here. A couple ways for you to do that. So go ahead and join our community. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, hit the join button, hit the join our community, fill out a tiny little form. Promise we will not spam you. This is really just for us to send you twice monthly promotions. We have 2 different kinds of events a month. One is our educational program, which is what Giselle did. And then a couple weeks later, we typically have something called a growth group, which is a small, intimate, peer networking discussion where with myself and a few other small business experts, we'll kind of guide you through whatever self-employment topic you have. If you'd like to join us for any of those programs, go to the Meetup tab, go to Upcoming Events, go down to the bottom, and you'll see all of the programs that we have coming up. Right now, we're booked through August, and we keep on putting up new topics. Also, just as a community service, I put in the chat box a couple of community things. First of all, while we do not, this is not a W-2 regular employment type of a group, but I was asked to share about the virtual 50+ employment expo on March 29th, sponsored by JCA. They do this a few times a year. The link is in the chat. And then also score.org. We don't typically talk about them, but they are also a nonprofit, and they are specifically to help folks with self-employment. They have live webinars constantly, free. And I put down the link for that. So as a compliment to what we do, feel free to check them out as well. And we look forward to seeing you again at a future BoomerWorks event. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.